Thank you everyone for joining us today. We will just give it a few seconds as our audience joins, and then we will begin. Okay, a very good afternoon to everyone joining us today. My name is Rania Saadewi, and I am the Executive Director here at the Pearl Initiative. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual panel discussion in partnership with STC and ACCA on discussing integrity through governance frameworks. Before we begin, I'd like to start by first introducing the Pearl Initiative. The Pearl Initiative is the Gulf region's leading nonprofit business-led organization working to improve corporate accountability and transparency across the private sector, across family firms, small businesses, SMEs, startups, and philanthropic or nonprofit organizations across the Gulf region. The Pearl Initiative was established 10 years ago by regional business leaders and the United Nations Office for Partnerships. More recently, we are one of the few organizations in the Gulf region to receive special consultative status from the United Nations Economic and Social Council. The Pearl Initiative runs programs focusing on governance-related matters, conducting regionally based research, convening business leaders, government, and civil society leaders and students to discuss challenges and opportunities in implementing best practices in the workforce. We also run workshops and trainings to support business professionals as they take the lead in implementing corporate governance, accountability, and transparency practices in their organizations. Through our Anti-Corruption Best Practices Program, a flagship program at the Pearl Initiative, we are collaborating with our corporate partner, STC, to discuss and improve good governance and anti-corruption in the Gulf region. The goal of today's panel discussion is really to empower Gulf-based businesses and small businesses that are facing economic challenges to help build their resilience, integrity, and transparency by implementing best practices and integration of the ESG framework. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our esteemed moderator for today's session, Danish Shamsi, the Regional Business Development Manager at ACCA, an organization that upholds the mandate to grow the global profile of accountancy in the region while continually developing and nurturing strategic relationships. Joining Danish on today's panel, I would like to welcome our experts and esteemed panelists for today, beginning first with Mr. Ali Al-Hazani, the Corporate Governance General Manager at STC. Mr. Ali is passionate about organizational transformations with over 11 years of experience in organizational development and corporate and investment governance. Joining Mr. Ali is Mr. Marwan Abdul Haq, the Director at Governance Dynamics. Mr. Marwan has over 20 years of experience working with the Big Four companies, corporations, and governments in internal and external audits. He is an expert in fraud management, governance, risk, and compliance. And last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Hanifa Yamer joining us as the Head of Sustainability Services for the Middle East and North Africa for Jones Lang LaSalle. Hanifa heads the Sustainability Consulting Services practices across the Middle East and North Africa. She brings with her extensive experience and knowledge in sustainability, with over 20 years of experience across the full suite of sustainability services, including climate change and energy, water management, health, safety and well-being, human rights, diversity and inclusion, responsible investment, and responsible banking. It is a true honor to be joined by these experts joining us from around the Gulf region and the world. And for you, our esteemed audience, we encourage you to participate in our conversation today, to use the chat function to share your reactions, questions, and thoughts of the conversation through today's panel over the next hour. There will be a dedicated Q&A session towards the end of today's session, and we ask you to submit your questions throughout today's session so that they can be addressed by our panelists today. In addition, throughout today's session, there will be poll questions where we encourage you, our audience, to participate so we know a little bit more about you and what you are getting out of this session. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Danish to kick off our conversation.
Thank you very much, Rania, and a very warm welcome to all of you for joining this unique panel today. In today's discussion, we will be highlighting the importance of how corporate governance continues to be recognized by the private sector as a fundamental component of business operations, of growth, and of resilience. This, coupled with the effective implementation of risk, compliance, and integrity measures, helps improve organizational control, whilst also reducing liabilities, siloed operations, and redundancies. A common future trend has been observed, which is the introduction of environmental, social, and governance metrics, also known as ESG, referring to the sustainable and social impact of an organization and encompasses strategies to optimizing benefits for both businesses and society across the Gulf and beyond. With companies trying to further their social responsibility and enhance their impact towards their stakeholders, the integration of ESG has come to the forefront of business strategies. A strong ESG proposition helps companies tap into new markets while grow into ones they already operate in. When governing authorities trust corporate actors, they are more likely to award them the access, approvals, and licenses that afford fresh opportunities for growth. The governance part of the ESG equation has found its way more regularly and systematically into companies' business risk, compliance, and operational integrity through corporate governance procedures, codes of conduct, and policies, especially those relating to legal and regulatory matters. If the audience has any questions, please do feel free to send them in through the Q&A function on Zoom. We have allocated a few minutes at the end of today's session to answer them, but if we do feel a question is relevant, we will pose that to our panel on the spot. So if you can please pull up the first poll, and before we begin the panel discussion, it would be quite interesting to have an understanding of the industries all of our audience here today is representing. So if we can have the poll put up, please. If you can please let us know which sector you are representing today. Right. Okay, so a fair split. Surprisingly, we don't have anybody from the finance and banking sector or energy, considering we are based in the Gulf, but a good split between services, healthcare, telco, and other. Mind you, other can encompass a broad range. So thank you very much for sending that in. And we shall kick off. And the first question I would like to pose to our panel is to Mr. Marwan. Marwan, what are, in your opinion, some of the key internal and external factors affecting governance in business operations? What are some of the risks and challenges associated with implementing adequate governance policies?
Thank you, Danny, for the question. And first of all, I would like just to note that governance is not a one-size-fits-all, as we all know now. And certainly, when we want to look at the framework of governance to our organizations, it's a key issue to formally assess those internal and external factors and how those interact together to come up with the best fit of governance. For instance, the external factors, we have to look first to our legal and regulatory environment. What are the laws that affect our organizations? For example, labor law, company laws in the country that I am operating in. What's the fiscal policy of the government? What are the other key bankruptcy laws, for example, whether there are antitrust laws or not? So this is from law external to the organization. Also, the other perspective will be the financial sector. It's very important because financial sector will provide the funding that is necessary to expand, the funding necessary to realize projects, and until what extent this or this type of funding is really facilitated in this economy, till what extent it's mature regarding the AML and the financial crime combating framework. It's very important. It fits to our governance. Also, externally, we have to look to the legislative supervising agencies that we have. For example, till what extent we have an active stock exchange regulator, internal and external audit legislations and authorities. For instance, here in the UAE, we have Abu Dhabi Accountability Authority, FAA in Dubai. We have Nazaha in Saudi Arabia. So those, they have a major effect in shaping the governance structure. And I can add, last and not least, the competency of the other professional service providers in the economy. For instance, the external auditors, their competence, their independence. Are there really regulations to have appropriate independence measures and competence measures? Also for investment consultancies, for legal advisors. So in short, those are, I would say, an examples of what are the external forces that shape the governance structure. Internally, first of all, we have to look to the structure itself, our organization structure, till what extent we have adequate distribution of power. And of course, adequate, it's subjective. Every organization is different than the other, but in general, till what extent we have appropriate segregation of duties, appropriate segregation between the board and senior management, till what extent also we have adequate fraud policies, conduct policies, and not only the policies, but also the degree of commitment to these policies, okay? Because it's obvious that, for instance, I can give an example, whistleblowing. Are the board taking it seriously? It is really anonymous as an option. So those are the internal environment. I can add to this also the adequacy of the performance management and succession planning. This is very important because this fits into the sustainability of the organization in great terms, and it shapes its principal performance. And the board competency by itself, till what extent they are having appropriate KPIs to measure their performance, till what extent they are aware of the changes that we have in the business environment. And you know, it's amplified in the last few years very obviously. For instance, are they aware of the artificial intelligence and its effect on the organization? We have now the metaverse, the blockchains. So in short, I hope that I just highlighted the basic internal and external governance components that every organization should be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Marwan. Few very relevant factors you did bring up, particularly pertaining to internal corporate board structures, as well as the need for a good succession planning in order for organizations to be sustainable. What I would be also interested to hear from you, Marwan, is what are some of the risks you foresee in implementing adequate governance policies?
In general, I would say the financial implication, it's really a challenge. So, we have to realize and we have to admit first that yes, going with a proper governance framework, it has its costs, but that will be on the short run. If we are convinced that on the medium to long run, this will result in sustainability and in good future perspectives to the organization and to the nation as well, then that can be easily adopted. For instance, I can recall at the time of Enron scandal and the issuance of Sarbanes-Oxley, the estimation at that time of compliance with Sarbanes-Oxley in 2003, and I know this very well because I'm an ex-Anderson. So it was up till it was estimated around $2.5 billion. So and you have to set up the processes for compliance. You have to hire GRC capable and savvy staff. So yes, so there should be in place, buying in the idea and training and workshops to have the decision makers acquire the understanding of why it's important. But of course, we cannot deny or overrun that financial implication is a challenge, and it's a risk that organizations might come short on some governance aspect just because of the financial part. Also, there is the legal and regulatory challenges. As I said before, one size does not fit all. You cannot import a framework, a governance framework, and just implement it by itself. So it needs internal and external evaluation, responding to your question. And this means that there are issues that we need really to take into consideration, okay, because there are risks. For example, till what extent you have really data available about your competition and the economy, till what extent you have appropriate and speedy regulatory and litigation processes. Okay, these are all different. Also, there are some cultural issues, and I want to highlight that thankfully we have recently many good laws and legislations that came up, okay, that will help the governance structure. Okay, for example, the recent labor laws, okay, laws against discriminations, gender equality, even working hours. Those are all come in the right direction of facilitating and decreasing the risk of having many difficulties to adopt appropriate governance. But of course, again, we need always to know that and to admit that there are some cultural challenge and the way that you look to things and financial challenges.
Thank you, Marwan. It actually brings us to a very interesting and nice segue into my next question, which would be to Ali. Ali, STC obviously is a major player in the Saudi Arabian and regional telco space. Now, Saudi Arabia itself being a major hub of cultural change at the moment, and bearing Marwan, what Marwan said about cultural and financial risks, what do you think, in your perspective, are some of the solutions individuals or organizations can take to mitigate these risks?
Yeah, sure. I think Marwan, he mentioned very important aspects with regard to the variety and diversity, and also the challenge of the regulatory compliance. We have the regulations, be the financial regulations, the industrial regulations, and it's quite challenging to make sure that the organizations in general are following these regulations with the challenge of these industries. To me, I think this is the importance of governance, is how to simplify the picture. How do we make sure that we really understand and embed these regulations in our system? How do we make sure that we systemize an internal governance tools, like what, for example, Marwan mentioned, in the structure, also in the processes, the authorities, the policies, the performance system, to translate these kind of governance regulations, and eventually to link this to the compliance and risk. That is, I think, the key, which is all around the GRC model. Having an effective and integrated GRC model would be the key of translating the complexity of the external side to the internal business.
Thank you, Ali. My next question is open to all panelists. I would like to hear all of your thoughts. Considering what Marwan and Ali have just said, is there a way we can achieve cross-functional maturity in business operations?
And I'm happy to go, since I haven't spoken at this point. I think absolutely. I think there's always been, in my experience in consulting over 20 odd years, and then actually working in industry, you often see great opportunities in organizations to create efficiencies across their different departments, across systems and activities within the operation. So I think there's absolutely scope for improvement. I think we are starting to see, as Marwan and Ali had spoken about, some of the complexities that businesses are having to deal with. The issues are no longer simple to respond to. They're multidimensional. They are interdependent. So you might have an issue here, but if you don't actually look at it, how it's impacting broader systems, issues, producing other impacts, you might actually be creating some perverse outcomes. So I think as the problems become so much more complex, and the need to have various parts of the business start to work together and integrate responses a lot better, I think we are seeing some great opportunities for innovation and efficiencies and maturity of businesses. So moving away from that very structured, siloed kind of approach to business model, but to a much more integrated, flexible, dare I say, agile type approach to responding to some of the issues around risk, particularly from a governance point of view.
I think Marwan earlier mentioned a piece about the short-term costs being a risk in terms of an organization implementing proper policies in place. If I can hear from any of you, what would an example of some of those costs, some of those short-term costs be? What would be considered a financial impact in implementing one of those policies?
If I may give an example about this, and especially in private sectors, there are a lot of structures that are now in the government that are obligatory. For example, having a full-fledged compliance function. So to what extent we have these in the private sector, especially the private entities that are not listed. So this is an example of course, that if you have to look at it from governance side and from governance maturity, yes, it's important to have a compliance function, and it's important for your sustainability, because this will likely will affect and having, better integrity within the organization, which means better sustainability, which means also better internal satisfaction, as well as you are mitigating any real litigation or regulatory surprises from the external side. And this is what we call, if we want to join all these factors together, simply we can call them principled performance. How do we work in a principled performance manner? So yes, we need to perform, but we need to perform with principles. Yes, we need to achieve, but we need to achieve with integrity. So this is one thing, but just let's take an example of what will be the adverse effects of not caring about what usually compliance function will mitigate. Nowadays, if you look to the internet, you will have a lot of reviews about organizations that may not be positive, about even their customer service. Can you imagine how this will have adverse effect also from disgruntled employees? They can post their reviews. That will have a major effect, on the sustainability of the organization on the long term. So put that into the succession planning, which also it has its cost. The internal development also, it has cost, but it's also it is a cost, and it's an administrative cost. When you send your senior officials for days or weeks on trainings, or even your line management. Yes, this and boards may have a thought how this will have a direct effect on the P&L or on the operation. No, that's why sustainability, maturity, it means always medium to short term, not medium to long term, not short term.
Thank you, Marwan. So you did touch on integrity, compliance, and risk, all as being fundamental components of corporate governance. If I may pause for a moment there and focus a bit on integrity, and if we can just bring up our next polling question, and we would like to know what would be your motive behind reporting non-financial and ESG activities. We can just take some time to think about that and select one. There is an option for no motive. Be very interested to see what some of the answers are. Right. So we have a fairly interesting split. We have corporate reputation with 64%. Whether or not that's surprising, it's really up for all of us to think about. Regulation, I would say, is quite important as well, and ROI and the requests of stakeholders or investors. Ali, if I can ask you, what are some business integrity principles and policies, and how can we support the evolving global integrity agenda?
I think, to me, the integrity is around making sure that there is one understanding within the organization around what do we mean by integrity and how integrity is helping the organization. Typically, organizations, they do have it through the code of ethics or code of conduct in multiple factors, and they trust in the quality of standards and value added in the organization, having an acceptable tolerance level, allowing for mistakes, and making sure that people, they have willingness to change and to enhance, having an employee citizenship. It's an identity of people, who we are and what do we stand for. It's also having or making sure there is some sort of level or minimum level of respect, and also making sure that there is a protection of rights for the individuals. I think these are the key elements and principles to have within the organization, also to evaluate against the maturity of integrity within the organization. I think how to make it an evolving within as a practice. It's how do we create meaning for the organizations? How do we create a meaning also for the individuals to adopt the integrity principles, and also for the other stakeholders? What does it mean to have an integrity within the organization for employees, for executives, for board of directors, for shareholders, for also the society? Because integrity as one of the main aspects around the sustainability is taking care also of all stakeholders' interests. So I think the challenge is how to make sure that it relates to everyone's interest, and also it adds value to everyone's interest across all domains of stakeholders. And it's really quite interesting when I see the poll that we just did, and people, they are more responding to the corporate reputation. I think this is really key value for the integrity, reflecting the integrity in the ESG, and how this is positively or negatively impacting the brand value of the organization. I think this is also relating to the financial implications of the corporate governance or the integrity of the organization in general. How do we evaluate, or how do we reflect on this financially? I think definitely ESG is a key measure, and that reflects on the brand value.
Thank you, Ali. I do think integrity underpins a lot of the ESG agenda, and even a lot of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Integrity is an underlying theme. So if I were to ask the panel, why are integrity, compliance, and risk fundamental components in setting up good organizational governance? I'd be very keen to hear your thoughts.
Okay, probably let's get to the integrity as a framework, and we all know that the UN Global Compact, they supported the principles such as, businesses and the demonstration of human rights. So, and here it's not only about complying with the laws, but it's like exceeding it to a culture of integrity. This also goes to the environment, okay, and to choose choosing the right environmentally business practices and technologies, and this needs maturity. You cannot expect organizations to go and to be very mature from ESG perspective in the very short term. One thing about integrity and how does it come to all these aspects is just to think, if we are highlighting sustainability as the ultimate objective of governance, how much fraud and corruption are actually affecting negatively the societies. And of course, the solution is the integrity. There is an estimation from UN that more than $1 trillion per year, it's lost from the developing economies because of bribery and anti-corruption, then definitely integrity fits absolutely into the sustainability and into the governance framework. And policies regarding whistleblowing, anti-money laundering, anti-bribery acts are very important. And you can see nowadays that the legislations are on the run to update and to enforce more provisions in that regard. And for the private sector, I believe most of us are aware that in the UAE, for instance, the anti-bribery law that was introduced back in 1987 was updated a few years ago to cover completely the private sector. So even if a bribe occurs between two private parties that are not public, not listed, and it was exposed, then that will be seriously penalized. And even they increased the penalty and from the financial side and from the other prosecution and imprisonment terms, etc. And the reason is that to send a message that that you cannot accept bribery and fraud because it's affecting your sustainability and the nation's sustainability as well. And also, if I can add something, because I'm involved in fraud training to the boards, okay, and it shows you the maturity of the integrity awareness in organizations. It's how to really explain to the decision makers that the irregular acts are not only what's against your organization, but also the irregular acts, it's what it looks like it's for the benefit of your organization. So giving an example, some might believe that having a misstatement in financials, okay, or hiding the information of a significant event, let's say a litigation that's coming in progress, that's and convincing the external auditors, okay, that we can just get away with it. And that's why we have spoken in the beginning about the importance of having and the independent external and internal audit. You can imagine that by one organization having a major misstatement, okay, that's intended to be. I'm not talking about here about a mistake or about, unintentional misapplication of an accounting standard. No, I'm talking about an omission or a misstatement that's actually being intended. Unfortunately, this may, on the short term, facilitate this organization to get a huge bank facility, right? But it also jeopardized the bank if this organization fail, and likely it will fail, especially in these economic conditions. You know that the failure will come, but it will come sooner rather than later, and it jeopardized the banks, and the bank may have to have issues with the other clients. So this is an example of how one act can be like a negative chain that affects a lot of parties in the organization or in the economy as well.
Thank you, Marwan.
Can I just quickly add, Danish, that I think integrity compliance risks, that they're almost, I would say they're the norm for any business. What I would add is when it comes to looking at sustainability, ESG, whatever term you choose to use, that these are not the only elements that are needed to ensure that you are meeting or achieving lots of the goals and activities intended or stakeholders wanting to see from government and corporate institutions. You know, you need the strategy department, you need human capital, you need all the elements of the business to actually start thinking about sustainability in everything they do. I think I just wanted to draw that out, that slight distinction. And the last thing I would say is, if we are saying integrity, compliance, and risk are fundamental for corporate governance, how much of that focus and activity is actually being picked up in relation to ESG sustainability related matters within corporate private sector? I would be challenged to say that I don't think it's nowhere near where it needs to be. So I'll leave it at that.
So in your opinion, Hanife, is addressing corruption a prerequisite for organizations to achieve a sustainable future?
I mean, it's the norm now. You have to look at all these things now. And I think Marlon was trying to allude that if you don't, because, you know, short term it costs too much, longer term you actually, and you think it's not going to impact me. But we know when there's been corporate failures like Volkswagen in relation to its greenhouse gas emissions, it didn't just affect Volkswagen and then its share price. The industry then got impacted by mandates and restrictions around and enhanced and increased compliance requirements for the design of cars and the monitoring of the greenhouse gas emissions. So I think that short-termism, and particularly when investors now are very much focused on ESG and longer-term impacts of sustainability and ESG on portfolios and the allocation of capital, I think corporate sort of short-termism is I'm hoping very much sort of a dying sort of mentality, and that we are starting to see longer term, medium, as Marlon said, medium to longer term thinking about some of these elements, some of these areas of risk.
So it's not even a question now, it's the norm. Ali and Marwan, would you agree with that?
I do.
Perfect. Great. Right. If we can now open up the next poll while we're still on the topic of ESG, it'd be interesting today to know how many internal audits of ESG topics your organization has done in the last 3 years. Again, considering from the very beginning, we did mention the industry split between our audience, and we had a good number from the telecommunication space. We had a good number from services, and also other industries not stated on there, none from the financial services industry. So it'd be interesting to see how many internal audits of ESG topics the organization has done. Very interesting. So the majority have at least done 1, 2, 3. Some of you don't know, which is also okay, but that's very interesting. What does the panel make of the result of that poll? Does that fall within expectations?
I think, for me, I think, look, I would actually say I was expecting worse numbers than that. So I'm really pleasantly surprised that there is, 1 to 3 internal audits considering ESG. That is good, because it has come a long way. I mean, again, I've been in this space for so long, and I still see, when I go into an organization, the absence of rigor, governance, oversight, systems and processes and procedures around anything to do with ESG. It's still very much driven by manual spreadsheets. Even when you look at sustainability reporting, which is a major disclosure to the market, often the board or senior management don't sign off on those documents to the market. So the question I always ask is, why is the financial reporting process provided with has so much oversight, rigor, and good governance in most cases, whereas a sustainability report has very little oversight and good governance? So I am glad to see that internal audit is starting to focus on this. And I think there is great opportunity for internal function in all the organizations to start looking at this a lot closer.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Especially as a lot of organizations align themselves to SDGs, they'll find themselves also having a requirement for ESG compliance, which brings me to my next question. What is ESG compliance, and what are some of the challenges faced by organizations as they integrate ESG practices within their daily business operations? It's a loaded question, I know, but if we take that step by step, what is ESG compliance?
So, I mean, I think defining ESG compliance can mean different things to different people. It could be regulatory compliance only. It could be compliance with internal mandates, policies. It could also include compliance with commitments that the organisation may have made publicly. So, for example, we are seeing a flurry, can I say, it's almost a weekly announcement, although it has de-accelerated slightly in the last couple of weeks, around net zero. We're hearing lots of announcements by the corporate sector and some governments, some countries even, around their net zero commitments. We know Saudi and the UAE have made a net zero commitment as well. So, ESG compliance can include all those elements, and I think it should. I don't think regulatory compliance with environmental legislation should be seen as anything more or less than a commitment to go net zero publicly and you not being able to do that. And now we saw in the poll that most people do ESG related activities for reputational purposes, and of course Marvin spoke about this at length. So I think looking at all those elements in that ESG compliance bucket, it would be incredibly important, and not to necessarily devalue other compliance elements just because they're not regulated. I think that's really important. I think some of the challenges are, well, they're actually very far and wide. I think we haven't got nearly enough time for me to go into all of that, but I think if you start from the regulatory point of view, I think I've seen a lot of in-house legal functions and even law firms still not really get to the point where they can understand how to scan the landscape for the ever increasing legislative requirements around ESG, whether they are, deep operational type regulatory requirements around contaminated water, or at the more strategic level around disclosures into the market, disclosing your risks to the market from an ESG climate change perspective. And we know that the UK government recently has announced that they will include mandatory climate risk disclosures into the marketplace. Exactly. So, so that's the regulatory bucket. I think one of the other biggest challenges about embedding ESG is awareness and understanding. I mean, what ESG means to me may mean very different things to the audience out there. And ESG is and sustainability. I often say there isn't actually a right or wrong way to define it, but you need to actually clearly define it as an organisation, what it means to you, and make sure that that is clearly defined to your stakeholders as well. So often there's a misalignment with what we are saying to the market as an institution, but then what we are doing internally. So that's something really important. I cannot stress the amount of criticality that awareness, understanding really has. And we know that I was at Ernst & Young recently are going to put all of their employees through a sustainability course to make them aware and understand what's involved and how to then obviously embed it in their service offering. So I can't stress that enough as well. I also think that there's, apart from some sectors like the oil and gas, mining and metals, I'm from Australia, so the mining and metals have been working and doing a focus on ESG sustainability for many years, but there's still a lot of industries that still struggle with systems, processes, and procedures. They're just not there. Often things are not automated, they're manual systems. Again, some of that short-term view is, well, we don't want to invest in it. It's not going to really impact us. So, it doesn't get the focus, and the poor sustainability manager within the organisation hasn't probably been given the support historically because of that short-termism. But I think obviously you can see how the market has gone. You can see what the investor pressure has been on private sector. You can even see, even at a strategic country level, UAE, Saudi want to work with the likes of BlackRock and others to partner on investments, and they can only do that also if they start to also demonstrate ESG capabilities and credentials. So I think you'll see that pressure coming through to the private sector. So systems, processes, policies, procedures. And I think one thing that's very different about ESG is that the organizations have very much been financially driven, bottom line, investors are our key stakeholder and no one else really matters, or they devalue sort of the other stakeholders. When you look at it, put an ESG lens, everyone matters. So you might think this small operation in South America, it's got a very small financial footprint, but it could actually have your biggest ESG risk from a community, human rights, environmental contamination type impact. So I think look at risk very differently with ESG, but also the way you identify and engage with the stakeholders is very different when you apply an ESG lens. So, I mean, there's much more I can talk about. But
yeah, no, absolutely. ESG has definitely become empowered more or less by a number of variables. One of them is also the debt markets. The major credit rating agencies now have a major ESG component. So if you do want investment, a lot of the emerging markets, a lot of the bond issuers are looking to adopt an ESG strategy. We do have a question on that, and that is, how has the board's involvement evolved or enabled ESG and sustainability strategy? So this is open to the entire panel, Ali, Marwan, and Hanife. The question is, yes.
Marwan might have some good views on that.
Yes. First of all, I would like to add to what Ali and Hanifa has expressed. We need more commitment, and also we cannot really assume now ESG, because as Hanifa said, the term can be having a lot. It's a multifaceted term, so it can have many definitions. We all know what ESG is, but also it can be expanding or contracting on some subjects. So we cannot really assume that all the decision makers in the corporations really knows and understand ESG quite well. So you need really, not only training, but also workshops, okay, to let them realize what is the actual benefit, okay, from ESG, especially that it may not be always measurable, okay, on short term or on bottom line term. Yes, there are some risks regarding the non-compliance. Okay, fine. So what they might say, all right, what are the laws? Let's tick mark the laws, but it goes beyond this. So the legislations, okay, and even the financial standards now, they are or in the process of acknowledging ESG, and nowadays we have to understand what are the physical risks and transition risks, okay, regarding the new climate challenges, and those will have a significant impact on the financial presentation. So whoever is concerned about the bottom line, yes, the ESG will affect your bottom line. And also, I would like to say that there is even from bottom line perspective, you need to demonstrate that your economy and your corporation is really attractive environmentally or ESG wise, because there is a lot of ESG conscious investors that are increasing in number around the world. And I read nowadays that it's estimated that around 17 trillion, which is more than 1/3 of the managed assets in the world, are ESG compliant or considered to be ESG compliant. This means a lot. And a good point to start if or before I say this good point, which is actually having, you know, a good checklist of the basic ESG principles, having some training, and also to, especially for private sector, to start to talk with the governmental agencies that regulate ESG or that gives guidance on ESG, to start to understand from them how to have the appropriate measures in place, rather than having in the nearby future measures that are maybe so stringent and they don't know how to deal with it. So they need to educate themselves. And this is a good opportunity for private and public partnership. We have seen in the pandemic that private and public partnership was really good and positive. And I see that this is a good opportunity for the private sector to communicate with those governmental agencies that regulate or cares about the environment. And yes, the ESG will affect the bottom line. Yes, the decision makers in the organizations, they need really awareness of ESG. And I will also put my voice into that of Hanifa and Ali, that the poll was really positive. I myself, I'm happy, being also coming from audit background, that now we are having ESG audits. So that's a good thing, and hopefully in the next panels or next polls, you will see an increase in this.
Thank you, Marwan. Thank you. Right. In the interest of time, I would like to thank you all for this valuable information and all of the great points that you have discussed. I do believe together we all can put the efforts on fostering accountability and transparency across different fields and organizations that would allow us to thrive and benefit together as a business community. Together with the Pearl Initiative support, active contribution, experts, and collective action, we should all continue to contribute to building a thriving economy in the Gulf region that embraces governance, accountability, transparency, all as key pillars of sustainable growth. Thank you very much. That's all from me. And I will now pass on to Rania for her closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danish, and to our esteemed speakers, Ali, Hanifa, and Marwan, for sharing your wonderful insights, debate, and experiences. I'm sure our audience has walked away with actionable tips that they can perhaps implement or begin thinking about to implement within their own organizations and companies. I would also like to thank all of you who attended and participated in our polls and for sending your questions to our panelists. Obviously, there's a lot more that we can dig into deeper, and we encourage you, our audience, to visit our website and sign up for our newsletter and check our social medias for upcoming similar webinars and in-person convenings, workshops, trainings, and other seminars in 2022 on different topics related to anti-corruption, integrity, ESG frameworks, and how to conduct such audits and implement this across the organization. Thank you all once again, and I wish you a lovely day ahead. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.